much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise to speak on behalf of the SNP, and I will do my very best not to take up quite as much of your or the House's time in my remarks. The UK Government has an opportunity with this trade bill to show leadership, to engage widely and consult with devolved nations, business and other stakeholders about what should be contained within it. But it seems very much like a paper-thin effort, and not a very great effort at that. Yeah. Because given the magnitude of Brexit and its potentially damaging ramifications, this pretty paper-thin trade bill is an affront to democracy, and it's lacking in any real detail. Not a great start as we enter this new territory. Because a hard Tory Brexit would be disastrous for the economy and completely undermine the Scottish Government's efforts to boost Scotland's trading position. We've just found out a few moments ago that the UK Government has dropped its promise to amend devolution aspects of the withdrawal bill, and it plans to do it in the House of Lords. That, Madam Deputy Speaker, is shameful, because the Secretary of State for Scotland made a promise in this House, on the floor of the House, to the people of Scotland and to the Scottish MPs. So we have significant concerns about the trust in this Government and about whether or not it can stick to its word. And on withdrawal, the Scottish Parliament should not have its powers in any way diminished, because, as we know, the Government cannot be trusted. And concerns have been raised by those such as the Law Society for Scotland, who say, "We are concerned by the extensive scope of delegated ministerial powers under the Act, mirroring concerns previously identified in relation to the use of Henry VIII powers in the context of the withdrawal bill. It's not clear why the Government considers why such wide powers are necessary." It would be interesting to hear from the Secretary of State what his take on that is. And also, in the Law Society of Scotland's excellent briefing, they talk about the clarity of drafting and how it is absolutely central to good lawmaking. Because it says under Clause 2, an international trade agreement means free trade agreement. However, free trade agreement is not in itself defined. And I think that's a really important point, because in all these discussions about free trade agreements, the actual definition is not given. It also refers to an international agreement that mainly relates to trade other than free trade agreement. However, mainly does not grant sufficient certainty in terms of interpretation. Now, I am no legal eagle, but I am sure my honourable and learned friend for Edinburgh South West will be intervening later to give us her take on matters.
I'm most grateful indeed to the Honourable Lady. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful indeed to the Honourable Member for allowing me to intervene on her. There is a very significant omission in the definition section, which is Clause 3, and that is in relation to Northern Ireland, because when I asked the Secretary of State on an intervention, he, of course, repeated the Government's mantra that there is a hope, of course, of restoring the Northern Ireland Executive. If there was indeed that hope, one would expect to see in the definition section some reference, a reference to the devolved authority, meaning the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, and hopefully acting jointly. There is zero mention of the First and Deputy First Ministers in the definition section in Northern Ireland. A devolved authority is defined as a Northern Ireland department. The Government, I suggest, is clearly preparing for direct rule, and I'm deeply concerned about that.
I thank the right honourable lady, and I share her concerns. It does seem very much like this Government is making policy on a wing and a prayer. Now, it's just over 20 years since the people of Scotland voted for devolution, for progress, to move forward and have power over some, but not all, of their own affairs. In 1997, voters in Scotland backed the creation of a Scottish Parliament by 74% to 26%, and for it to have tax-raising powers 63% to 37%, powers that we are very proud to be using. And the Scottish Parliament's pillars of establishment include to be accountable to the Scottish Parliament, it's answerable to the people of Scotland, to be open and encourage participation. The Scottish Parliament should be accessible and involve the people of Scotland in its decisions as much as possible. Now, I don't remind the House of this to give a history lesson, but to highlight what the people of Scotland voted for and what was delivered in devolution on a cross-party basis. This trade bill, and more generally Brexit, are not what Scotland, or indeed the rest of the UK, voted for. And this bill threatens devolution in Scotland, and it threatens that vote that took place nearly 20 years ago.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. She's quoted the Law Society of Scotland. Does she agree with me that it's very important for the Tory government to understand that it isn't just the SNP that are concerned about this bill, that it's a wide section of Scottish civic society which is completely behind the devolved settlement which we voted for so overwhelmingly in 1997, and the very trenchant comments of the Scottish Law Society should give the government pause for thought about what they're doing here, and the fact that it's not just the political party that says they're undermining the devolved settlement, it's an apolitical professional association with great legal expertise behind it.
I absolutely, and not surprisingly, agree with my honourable and learned friend. And it is true that Scotland voted by 62% to remain with the EU. And I and my colleagues are here today to stand up for Scotland for what was voted on in that referendum, and to defend and protect the powers of our Parliament in Scotland, the rights, protections and equalities that we enjoy by virtue of our membership of the EU. Because I, for one, am not going to let this chaotic and reckless Tory government diminish or damage the powers of our Parliament, country and economy of Scotland, which, without a very real and determined fight. And we shouldn't have to fight for our voice to be heard, Madam Deputy Speaker. Here, or in trade negotiations and any trade deals that are done, Scotland and the devolved nations should be treated as equal partners. And if we are not, we reserve the right to make a decision about our constitutional future. And I'll be happy to give
on that point, because of course just today we learned that the Scottish Parliament's Finance and Constitution Committee unanimously endorsed the view that they couldn't recommend legislative consent to the Scottish Parliament for the withdrawal bill. That includes no less Adam Tompkins, the spokesperson on the Constitution for the Conservative Party in the Scottish Parliament.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I'm not given to agreeing with Professor Tompkins, but on this matter I do. The SNP had a manifesto commitment to call for greater transparency in any proposed international trade deals following Brexit, with the UK and Scottish Parliaments being given a say. And the Secretary of State, I'm sure, will know there are 111 powers returning from the EU that intersect with the devolution settlement in Scotland that must come back to Scotland and not be seized by Westminster. And interestingly, they've been much quoted, but I'm going to quote them again. The Law Society of Scotland have highlighted the importance of extending a whole-of-governance approach to trade negotiations, and we very much endorse that. The Secretary of State will also know that we held a round table this morning, my honourable friend for Ross Skye and Lochaber. Unfortunately, the Leader of the Opposition was sorely missed. He was sorely missed. We would have loved to have seen him there. But the Law Society of Scotland have said we would urge further consideration of how trade negotiations will be handled where they intersect with the powers of the Scottish Parliament and other devolved legislative authorities, where any proposed trade agreements will affect an area of devolved competence. Devolved governments inevitably have different priorities. And indeed, as the Right Honourable Leader said previously, we have an area, a country, the UK, that does not have a parliament. And we need this government not to be making deals or imposing direct rule by the back door. It needs to be upfront about what it's doing and how it is going to make sure that the devolved nations of the United Kingdom have their say in this process. And they have different priorities, and therefore trade negotiations must be carried out with their involvement. For example, our Scottish food and drink sector has seen record growth year on year and outstripped the rest of the UK. Under the Protected Geographical Indication (PGI) scheme, the EU guarantees no trademark interference with the name of an area, a specific place, or in exceptional cases, a country. Used as a description, I'd be happy to give it.
I've heard from the Secretary of State how our exports have increased dramatically since the decision of the British people to leave the European Union. But I'm just wondering what aspects of the rolling over these trade deals that already exist between the EU and other countries that she objects to in this bill.
I'm not sure that that's something I've actually referred to. What I'm referring to is, well, indeed, but the point I'm making is that the powers that are going to be delegated upon this government, given to this government, and the deals that are in place and the powers that intersect with the devolved nations are not going to be protected. So what will happen is any future trade deals may well be imposed upon, impinged upon, and our powers will be diminished.
Well, wait, I'd be happy to. Isn't really the point she's trying to make? The point she's making, actually, very forcibly, is this, and members opposite may laugh, but it's very important for the Scottish and the British economy, because the biggest export of this country, of Scotland, and indeed the whole of the United Kingdom, is Scotch whisky. It's what's keeping the economy afloat. So it's very important to Scotland that these existing trade deals, such as the trade deal with South Korea, are perpetuated on the same terms, and that Scotch whisky's geographical indication is protected. Now, these are not just my concerns. I'm holding an email here from the Scottish Whisky Association, with whom I'm in regular contact. They want these matters raised. They, like I, am used to hearing assurances from the opposite benches, but we don't hear much else. But really, is not the point this, that my learned, my honourable friend is talking about the importance of Scotland.
Order. First of all, the honourable lady whose eloquence is far above average in this House, and that's meant to be a compliment, must know that she shouldn't make such a long intervention, and secondly, she can't have a private conversation with her honourable friend looking that way. She's got to look this way. Hannah Bardell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I absolutely agree with my honourable and learned friend. And the point is this: we don't want to leave the EU. We didn't vote to leave the EU. And the point we're making is that the legislation as it stands, not just by our standards but by others, is insufficient. Now, as I was saying, some of our most globally renowned brands, such as Scotch beef, Scotch lamb, Scottish farm salmon, are among the 14 protected food names in Scotland, along with the Arbroath Smoky, Dunlop cheese, and Stornoway black pudding, which are among the localities given the PGI status. And after Brexit and any trade deal, we must be able to protect these Scottish brands. And Scotch whisky is a very important example. It is the UK's biggest export. And quite frankly, we're getting a bit fed up of trade propping up the UK government and its economy. And so, last month the SNP government published a legislative consent memorandum outlining why it does not intend to lodge a legislative consent motion in relation to the bill. We firmly believe that policy responsibility and expertise for matters with devolved competence lie with the Scottish Government, accountable to the Scottish Parliament, and, as I said before, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the Scottish people. And we take democracy seriously in Scotland, and we do it, as I'm sure you're very aware, pretty well. When we had a referendum in Scotland on independence, we had the widest possible participation. We included the future of our nation, the 16 and 17-year-olds, who were sadly left out of the EU referendum and will reap what is being sown by Brexit. And we had a proper timescale for debate. We asked people what kind of nation they wanted to live in and be part of, rather than trying to exclude some people from society, other them, and blame them for the failures of the UK government's austerity plans. This trade bill, frankly, is lacking in detail and takes some very serious and worrying paths, and is just a starter for 10. We're told there's going to be a further bill later, but why not get it right now? Why not get it right? And why not be bold and stand by that old adage of Scotland leading the UK, not leaving the UK? Perhaps put forward proposals, they could have put forward proposals for the devolved nations to have offices of the Trade Remedies Authority, their own permanent commissioner. A truly collaborative approach could have been possible.
Will she give way?
I'd be happy to give way.
She asks why the bill is happening now. It's not really just to cover for the fact that the Secretary of State, a nice man though he is, doesn't really have a job.
The organisers, the parties.
I thank the honourable member for that intervention, and I don't want to be uncharitable to the right honourable gentleman. But let me make some progress, and then I'll take some further interventions. Now, the Trade White Paper was issued on the 16th of October with a deadline of the 6th of November. Not exactly a long period for consultation. didn't give much time to respond. When the trade bill was published the very next day, there was concern at the speed at which the process was concluded. The Manufacturing Trade Remedies Alliance, with whom I met recently, voiced anger on behalf of its members, saying officials would have had no time to analyse reaction to the trade white paper or brief the ministers on industry's concerns. And it does go back to that point about a proper process in a timeliness manner, and I'll be happy to give way to more.
Honourable Lady, and I think that's an absolutely excellent suggestion that the Trade Remedy Association does have an office in Scotland, a commissioner in Scotland, because it's the balance that feed into that equation and what remedies are taken can only really be properly answered by not having a Trade Remedies Association that is authority that's based in London with a London-centric point of view.
An opportunity to move away from that London-centric psychology. Now, in Scotland, Dave Tudor, the chairman of Life Sciences Scotland Industry Leadership Group, published an open letter to the UK's Brexit negotiators, warning of the damage that uncertainty is already inflicting on the industry. He said, and I think these are really grim words that we should all take note of: widespread concern over regulation, movement of goods, access to talent and research and development, and that the negative impact of this uncertainty is only going to intensify. And I wonder genuinely when it will dawn on the UK government and others across this House, when universities can't staff their courses and have to close departments, when our universities drop down the world rankings because they cannot attract talent and European funding, when we become a union of diminished importance and influence, because I for one have no intention of letting that happen to Scotland, or if I can help it, the rest of the UK. Because as our First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said recently, no Brexit is preferable to no deal. And we accept that the UK government should make preparations for the UK's withdrawal from the EU, in particular with regard to maintaining important continuity of current trading arrangements. This is of vital importance to business across the UK and EU. However, we are very concerned about the direction of travel that this bill takes us in. Since 2007, Scottish exports to the EU have grown by more than 25%, a clear demonstration that the single market is Scotland's real growth market. Being part of the EU means our businesses are operating within the world's largest trading area of 500 million potential customers, a market 8 times bigger than the UK alone, containing 8 of our top 12 export destinations. The financial services sector alone employs 40,000 people in Edinburgh, and there are over £500 billion of assets under management in the city. We've already seen banks move jobs from London because of fears of a hard Brexit when we lose membership of the single market. And just a month ago, the European Banking Authority announced it will move from London to Paris.
Well, she can agree on that point.
I'd be happy to do that.
I thank my honourable friend for giving away the very serious point she's making. And isn't that in stark contrast to what they were originally coming out with, that somehow Brexit was going to lead to Empire 2.0 and the floodgates would open in terms of the opportunities to the United Kingdom? In fact, what we see is the floodgates are opening in the opposite direction. People are fleeing the United Kingdom at the prospect of what's happening with Brexit.
And I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I don't want to be the doomsday scenarioist, but the reality is these are things that are happening now. The European Medicines Agency is off to the Netherlands, and this is a significant loss to the UK and diminishes its role in regulating medicines. It takes away 900 jobs and a serious amount of influence. Now, in terms of my own constituency of Livingston, which is at the heart of West Lothian, around 4,500 to 5,000 jobs are sustained by exports to the EU, and I know that members across the chamber will have been contacted and know the numbers that they are potentially going to lose. Due to its relatively strong manufacturing base, the proportion of West Lothian's international trade with its EU partners is estimated to be higher than the average Scottish level. So I, as a constituency member, have very real and grave concerns. And many business people I've spoken to have expressed deep worries about the lack of experience in the Brexit and international trade departments. And I pay tribute to the staff in those departments. Nonetheless, these are real concerns that have been raised with me. Now, the Secretary of State for International Trade himself admitted in an interview last year that Britain has turned down countries wishing to strike free trade deals after Brexit because the government does not have the capacity to negotiate them. Somewhat contradicting comments that he made previously that securing a post-Brexit trade deal with the EU should be the easiest in human history. Not so easy, Madam Deputy Speaker, if you don't have the staff. Now, the potential impacts are significant, ranging from planes being grounded the day after Brexit to fresh Scottish produce rotting in protracted customs processes, to prohibitive tariffs and diminished access to labour. Take airlines, for example. As the London Market Group explained to me, a broad range of EU-based businesses, often undertaking activities critical to the EU economy, require specialist cover from the London insurance market, airlines included. Currently, the UK insurance market is the only location with the specialist aviation insurance knowledge and financial capacity to provide the full coverage for all of the risks faced by an airline. If airlines cannot get this insurance when we leave the EU, there is a risk that aeroplanes could be grounded at the end of March 2019. Now, I raised this in Parliament on the floor of the House on the 11th of September, and I was laughed at. I was laughed at across the chamber. And lo and behold, that very risk was raised almost a month later. The Chancellor was the first Cabinet Minister to admit that no deal could indeed ground all flights. And it took so long because the government had not done, as we know, a proper assessment of the economic consequences. Without contractual certainty, which is the fear following Brexit, there could be market disruption and dislocation for a whole range of sectors. UK fishermen, fish processors, I'd be happy to give way. Yep, to the honourable gentleman.
Very grateful to the honourable lady for giving way. She's repeated the scare that flights will be grounded somehow on the day that the UK leaves the EU. May I suggest to her that she looks at the transcript from the Transport Select Committee evidence session when the heads of major airlines and airports said that such a fear was completely groundless.
Thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, but not all of them have said that. I am quoting directly from someone who has brought that information to me. So I appreciate there are different views and different takes on it, but as we...
Some in the airline industry think that they can go back to the agreements that existed from 1945 to 1955, but when you look at the bilateral aviation agreements, they actually stipulate London airports. So that leaves the rest of us in hook, and maybe Heathrow is okay.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and would just remind the honourable gentleman opposite who just made an intervention, it was the Chancellor. It was the Chancellor who said and who raised said that those were a concern. Now, financial services of all kinds, from insurance to loans and derivatives, could be disrupted because UK firms would not be able to continue servicing EU customers or vice versa. EU banks that have derivatives cleared through the UK central counterparty CCP clearinghouses are in breach of regulations, as those CCPs may not be authorised. I appreciate this is a very technical point, but I do think that it's important. Contracts may have to be unwound or could become unenforceable, and according to reports from the Association of Financial Markets in Europe, 1.3 billion euros of bank assets, including loans, securities and derivatives, may need to be moved from the UK to the EU. I am sure that the Secretary of State is very familiar with these issues, but I do wonder what he and his colleagues are going to be doing about it. The bill also gives the government power to implement agreements with partner countries corresponding to the EU's free trade agreement, FTAs. We have serious concerns about this, although we hear that the UK government is off negotiating deals in the US, top secret deals I may add, which the Honourable Member for North Somerset said should remain classified for 4 years if a deal is struck. That just, Madam Deputy Speaker, beggars belief, because this trade bill provides measures for HMRC to also collect data on behalf of the government, and the Right Honourable Gentleman asked earlier, did I not agree that this should happen? I have no problem with that. I think it's important that it happens, but it's how it happens. It's vital that data is collected in an appropriate fashion, and the Law Society of Scotland have expressed concerns around this, saying that we are concerned that Clause 7(1) grants a very wide discretion to HMRC to require information. The scope of this provision should be more clearly defined to give greater certainty as to the extent of the information and the anticipated frequency and method of data collection. Now, the Scottish Government and the SNP in power in Scotland, our focus has always been to preserve our place in Europe for the benefit of business, the economy and families everywhere. And the only way that a hard Tory Brexit can be avoided if Labour joins with the SNP in our continued membership of the Single Market and Customs Union in these Brexit negotiations. And I know these benches aren't very comfy, but some of the bums opposite must be pretty sore from sitting on the fence, because we really need to get together on this issue. Now, Liberty has expressed deep concern, saying that the plans are the latest attempt by ministers to undermine democracy and bypass parliamentary scrutiny of the Brexit process after the EU withdrawal bill and data protection contain similar Henry VIII powers. The bill defines retained EU law to include primary legislation that gives effect to EU mandates such as the Equalities Act and the Modern Slavery Act. Madam Deputy Speaker, these continue to be wide-ranging, not just on these benches, but across society. But in closing, I would like to share with you a little lyric that I wrote that sums up the current situation. BREXIT, fed up with Brexit, me through. Trading relations, heading down the Swanee. If it doesn't fit on the side of a bus, let's not say it, don't make a fuss. Phase 1 was a floundering mess. The Prime Minister said she did her best. The Irish border was the sticking point, and the DUP. Cross-border trade, we're told it's possible. It's about wording, you see. A fudge, not a dodge. And as the Right Honourable Lady for Maidenhead really lost the thread, the Brexit spool unravels. Our economy headed south, and what about travel? Blue passports, we're told. Ah, perfect, imported they'll be. That's me, I'm sold. Choose Brexit, choose a new queue at the airport we'll be going through. Is for the next generation of children, I fear. Erasmus, international trade, travel will be lost, I shed a tear. LGBT rights, workers' rights, equal pay, all important things. The EU has paved the way. On the night of the referendum and then the next day, promises were made. They were dead straight away. How will history judge our politicians of today? All of us here, not well, I'd say. Not all of us want to be facing this mess. In Scotland, we voted to stay in. We think it's for the best. So let's get together and stop this guddle. For the sake of our future, we need out of this Brexit muddle.
Order. I hadn't expected this part of the proceedings to take quite so long, so I now have to reduce the time limit to 7 minutes.